I'm Mike, and today, the ketogenic diet. We're going to look at some keto claims and the going keto narrative and see if it holds up to the research. We're also going to look at some of the unheard warnings of followers of a ketogenic diet, also what happened to one of my viewers when they went keto, and the unforeseen effects in the realm of diet and beyond. Let's start by quickly looking at the basic mechanics of a ketogenic diet, which relies on a state called ketosis, which is normally a starvation state, but the idea is since you're eating enough calories, it's only mimicking starvation. In this state, your body doesn't have enough sugar to run itself and instead converts fat to ketones, which are an energy-carrying acid that can fuel most of your body, but only about 2/3 of a starving brain. The rest must be glucose, which in this case would have to be converted from protein or fat as well. A standard ketogenic diet involves eating 70 to 80% of your calories from fat and only about 5% from carbohydrates and the rest from protein, and looks like this: meat, dairy, oil, eggs, and a few plants on the side. Just one banana would put you over your daily carb limit. Though now it is mainly a weight loss trend, the ketogenic diet was originally a treatment for children with epilepsy. And I will cover that more at the end, but because of this, it has been researched for 100 years, so we have scores of well-designed studies on ketogenic diets. Because keto people who are watching this probably won't believe what I, a vegan, has to say about their diet, I want to turn largely to the words of somewhat of a whistleblower within the ketogenic diet community to look at these findings. So to be clear, much of the information in this video is not coming from me at all. Okay, let's look at the words of Paleo Mom, a ketogenic diet advocate and PhD holding nutritional researcher, and here is what her cautionary statements are about the adverse effects of a keto diet. She says keto is, quote, a diet with inherent risk as evidenced by the extensive list of adverse reactions reported in the scientific literature, and this has not yet been a thorough enough part of the public discussion on ketogenic diets. She clarifies that adverse effects are not just simple side effects, they are actual dangerous reactions. She then says, quote, I feel a moral and social obligation to share what I understand of these diets from my perspective as a medical researcher. Okay, here is her list of well-documented adverse effects from a keto diet. If you're from the US, this will sound a bit like a drug commercial. Gastrointestinal disturbances like diarrhea, vomiting, nausea, constipation, etc. Inflammation risk, thinning hair or hair loss, kidney stones. One study found that 5% of children had kidney stones. Children. Muscle cramps or weakness, hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar, low platelet count, impaired concentration/cognition. That is in people, but for what it's worth, we also have studies showing decreased brain growth in adolescent rats. Next, we have impaired mood and renal tubular acidosis, which is when the kidney fails to remove all the acid because ketones are very acidic. Nutrient deficiencies. Many keto blogs downplay the risk of nutrient deficiencies. These are nutrient deficiencies on doctor-supervised diets. There's disordered mineral metabolism, poor growth in children, skeletal fracture, and osteopenia or osteoporosis. All of these are bone problems largely caused by the acidic blood conditions of ketosis. There's increased bruising, sepsis, infection, and bacterial overgrowth. This is likely caused by the hyperlipidemia, which is induced by a very high-fat meal of cream or oil or other high-fat sources. This makes the blood stack like quarters and creates a traffic jam for your immune cells, preventing them from doing their job. There's pneumonia, acute pancreatitis. This kid died of a heart attack on a ketogenic diet after having acute pancreatitis. The researchers highlight the mechanism that a ketogenic diet caused it in the study. There's long QT intervals, which is an electrical abnormality that can lead to sudden death. There's cardiomyopathy, a condition in which the heart is either enlarged or stiffened. In this study, they found that 15% of the children on a ketogenic diet had enlarged hearts. One who had it particularly bad was taken off the diet and recovered, highlighting the obvious dietary nature. There's a shift toward atherogenic lipid profiles, which includes super high cholesterol and triglycerides. There's also heart arrhythmia, myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, menstrual irregularities, and amenorrhea, which is a loss of period, and finally death. And just because you might be thinking this, Paleo Mom says no, just because a lot of these studies were done on children doesn't mean that these adverse effects won't happen to you. Despite all of these well-studied danger, the going narrative is that keto is safe. Paleo Mom goes as far as to call this dogma, saying it's a quote bias-motivated dismissal of any studies to the contrary of this narrative. Now let's look to a real-life example of that hypercholesterolemia or high cholesterol, one of the adverse effects that she mentioned. Let's look a few months back to one of my earlier viewers who will remain anonymous, but let's just say they had keto in their name, so they were really into it. As you can see, they were eating a pretty standard keto diet dominated by eggs and oil and meat and butter. Their fasting cholesterol was at 440. That is deadly. At first, their doctor was like, oh, you're 400 cholesterol, that's just genetic, there's nothing you can do. But then they went on a plant-based diet and their cholesterol level shot down to around 150, which is considered ideal, and that was the largest transformation their doctor had seen in their entire career. And looking at LDL, or bad cholesterol in particular, here's a blogger whose LDL was nearly 300 on a ketogenic diet. Yet low-carb doctor and researcher Lauren Cordain, who founded the paleo diet, says ideal levels are between 50 and 70. Is something not matching up? Now, to be fair, this does not happen to everybody, and the literature is mixed. Here's a study showing that LDL levels stayed about the same. And this study found that LDL can lower a bit on a ketogenic diet, but they did reduce total calories by 400 to 500, which could be responsible for that. But the main takeaway with heart disease here is that despite the convoluted keto narrative on cholesterol of, oh, the LDL is puffy, so it's fine, and yeah, your cholesterol is skyrocketing, but it's HDL, they have yet to bring anybody down to ideal levels of cholesterol like newborn babies or our ape relatives or vegans. They certainly have not unclogged arteries and reversed heart disease like a vegan diet has. Another notable effect, keto diets were shown to raise cortisol, your stress hormone, by 18%, as this study judged based off urinary cortisol levels. This is because cortisol plays a role in the necessary fat storage involved in a ketogenic diet, but also because you're watching all these people eating carbs and you can't eat carbs. That has to be stressful. But seriously, higher cortisol levels are bad for many reasons, including their association with heart disease, and it makes sense. Your body thinks it's starving to death, it's gonna be stressed out. Another kind of strange, unforeseen, and unstudied effect that I have noticed, maybe you've noticed, is the dark circles under the eyes associated with a low-carb or keto diet. I call these paleo eyes or keto eyes. It is not just my observation, this is all over the forums. One person wrote, "Why is it that whenever I take my carbs down to less than 100 grams, I look like a panda?" And from another who started a low-carb diet, quote, "A few days ago, really dark circles began to appear under my eyes. My wife is really worried." Okay, that can't be good, but let's take a break from the negative effects of a keto diet for a second and look at the main reason that people, the masses, actually try keto diet, and that is weight loss. There is no denying that people have had weight loss results on a keto diet, but let's look beyond the anecdotes and see how it performs. Right off the bat, this study found that when compared to other low-carb diets, a ketogenic diet did not increase weight loss in obese patients and had, quote, several adverse metabolic and emotional effects. And when you look at one of the most touted studies on keto weight loss on obese individuals, you see that they're losing about 1, maybe 1.25 pounds per week, but they are also put on a 450 calorie deficit. So it's hard to say whether this is just calorie restriction or not. And a study on vegan diets in obese patients showed that they also lost about 1 pound per week, though they were also at 350 less calories per day than normal. The main difference here is that a vegan diet is sustainable long-term and does not have that long list of adverse effects, and vegan populations in the Western world at least are shown to be in a normal BMI range on average. But what happens to fat loss when a keto diet is put head-to-head with a normal carbohydrate diet with equal calories? Well, this very recently released controlled feeding trial, which is considered the gold standard and was also funded by the National Institute of Health, found that, quote, body fat loss slowed during the ketogenic diet and coincided with increased protein utilization and loss of fat-free mass being muscle, water, bone, or organ weight. As this chart shows, when people went keto, they had a spurt of weight loss, and that might feel like an accomplishment, but the DEXA scan showed that no, it was hardly any fat, as this chart highlighted. In fact, the fat loss slowed so much that it took the full 28 days on a ketogenic diet to lose as much fat as just 15 days on the normal carbohydrate diet. And in case you were skeptical, yes, these people went into ketosis after just a few days, as we can tell by the fat oxidation indicated in the respiratory quotient. But many keto proponents responded to this study by saying, hey, it was never about any crazy metabolic effects. It's about how a ketogenic diet suppresses your appetite. And to them I say, you can no longer claim that a ketogenic diet's weight loss is from mimicking starvation. It is clearly from actual starvation. This is definitely not a healthy way to lose weight, and this lack of desire to eat enough for your body explains all these adverse effects like nutrient deficiencies. And just like coming out of any other starvation period, weight rebounding is likely. This is well documented on other low-carb diets, and there's no reason to think it's any different. And from the journal Obesity, quote, in the short term, the low-carbohydrate ketogenic diets cause a greater loss of body water than body fat. Water weight is regained when the diet ends. And finally, from a logical perspective, if you are training your body to store fat and burn fat, what happens when a preferred source of calories, glucose, comes and replaces the burning of the fat? Then you just have that storage mechanism left over. Next, I want to really quickly look at another reason that people go on a ketogenic diet, and that is to hopefully boost their athletic performance. But as this study shows, people on a ketogenic diet are more tired and have less of a desire to exercise. And no matter what goal you're trying to achieve in athletics, that's not going to help. One thing is for sure, we are not going to see any high intensity records like any world sprinting records by people in ketosis because they have depleted glycogen stores. Many sources also say that building muscle is not ideal on a ketogenic diet because carbs play a major role in muscle building, but there are really no studies on this, so I cannot say definitively either way. Now to what I view as the most frustrating part of the ketogenic diet narrative, that ketosis is the natural state of the human body. Here's Dr. Perlmutter, a ketogenic advocate.
Generally, our state of metabolism was pretty much in a low grade of ketosis almost throughout the year for as long as we've been walking the planet because we didn't have carbs.
This is a completely ludicrous point, but actually quite convenient because we can't measure the metabolism of our ancestors 2 million years ago. But please appeal to logic here. Even the Inuit, who were once believed to be the poster children of ketosis because of their high-fat, high-meat diet, have a genetic resistance that prevents them from entering ketosis. As this study shows, the usual diet of Eskimos shows no ketosis. And looking around the world, shouldn't we see people in ketosis? No, instead we see starch-based population after starch-based population. Even the Yanomami Indians, who don't use agriculture, they do horticulture, they are still starch-based and not in ketosis. And what about all the adverse effects? The reports of people losing their period, is that natural? How about the acidification of the body, which leads to growth stunting and kidney stones in children? No, and the final kicker, as this study showed, low-carb diets, which include many ketogenic diets, increased your risk of all-cause mortality by over 30%. Okay, now it's finally time to look at ketogenic diets and epilepsy. This is how ketogenic diets started in the 1920s because they found that kids were having way less seizures when they were put on a ketogenic diet. And years later, studies find that about 10 to 15% of children put on a ketogenic diet no longer have seizures, and about half of them have a 50% reduction in seizures. The exact mechanism of this is yet to be determined, but one theory is that a lot of these neurological impairments are caused by the inability of glucose to be delivered properly to the cell, and ketones offer an alternative pathway of energy transport. But I think the main point here is that no, you cannot claim these epilepsy benefits of a ketogenic diet while simultaneously ignoring the adverse effects which were discovered in the exact same studies, and that is exactly what the ketogenic diet community is doing. That being said, yes, I do find the idea of powering the brain with ketones promising and hopeful, but I do not think it's necessary to have a ketogenic diet that is animal-based and high cholesterol. And there is a possibility that we don't have to do this through diet at all. As this study shows, we can raise blood levels of ketones simply by eating ketones. This study demonstrates the efficacy and tolerability of oral exogenous ketone supplementation in inducing nutritional ketosis independent of dietary restriction. Finally, yes, a vegan keto diet does exist and people are experimenting with this, but unless you have a very dire condition, it's doubtful that the potential adverse effects are worth it because your body is still going to reach that acidified state. But moving past personal health, one major concern I have with this diet is that in a time when we are skyrocketing past the point of no return in terms of climate change and atmospheric carbon, this is an extremely carbon-intensive diet. And as this study estimated, a high meat diet emits about 2.5 times more carbon than a vegan diet, and it's likely that a ketogenic diet pushes even further than that. So you cannot claim to be an environmentalist and eat a standard ketogenic diet, not to mention the massively increased animal impact, the more money that you're putting toward these harmful animal industries, and really it's just not cool to kill animals in the name of weight loss, just saying. In conclusion, if you're one of those people that says a keto diet worked for me, in effect you are saying by mimicking starvation and decreasing my appetite, I was able to actually starve myself, which put me at a risk of increased adverse events such as heart disorders, kidney stones, super high cholesterol, pancreatitis, and even death. That worked for me. So no, the ketogenic diet should not be viewed as a casual diet for anybody to be trying. It should be viewed as a very dangerous treatment with well-documented adverse effects and a massively increased negative impact on the environment and animals. And in the end, there is no reason to believe that any improvements that you have on a ketogenic diet will last long term, so I urge you to not believe the hype and instead choose a more sustainable diet for your weight loss, for the environment, for your health, and for the planet. Alright, that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I will catch you next time.